Even if they didn't speak that person's name, that half-crying, half-smiling mask immediately surfaced in Julian's mind. So what you're saying is that if I leave now, the one who planted you will hunt me down on the road. But if I stay here, he won't come. Correct? The flower Yao were pleased, and chattered in the affirmative, nodding their heads. An unknown fury blazed in Julian's chest. To trap him in this unspeakable situation without even having the decency to try to kill him. Were they playing with him, or what? Why not simply battle to the death? He collected himself and forced down his irritation. It seemed the other party had no intention of facing him head-on. They only wanted to damage his spiritual power by making him fall from grace and lose devotees. Or the flower Yao could be lying. But even if that were the case, Shilian wasn't sure they'd be able to return safely. Even if the boy could support him or carry him on his back, should the other party purposely throw some vermin at them halfway down the road, the situation could get worse, or at least become even more awkward. After some deliberation, Shilian exhaled a feverish breath and closed his eyes. "Take me to the cave over there." That young soldier followed his instruction and helped him cross the corpse-strewn ground. When they reached the cave mouth, Shilian gave a throaty gasp. "Stop!" The little soldier halted. Even a simple gesture like raising a hand had Shilian shaking uncontrollably. "Where's your sword?" The boy shifted him to his left arm and freed the right to brandish his sword. Shilian peeled back his sleeve and revealed part of his arm. Under the glowing moonlight, his skin was smooth and pale as the softest white jade. The boy's breath suddenly hitched, but Shilian didn't notice. "Stab me," he ordered in a husky voice. The hand that held the worn sword immediately dropped. "Don't worry, just stab me," Shilian urged him. "Stab deeply. I need to draw an array. There are no other spiritual devices on hand, so we need blood." "Your Highness, please use my blood," the young soldier protested, and he raised his own arm and cut without any hesitation. "No need," Shilian hurriedly replied. "Your blood—" But his words didn't make it in time. A deep gash had already been drawn on the boy's arm, and fresh blood flowed from it. Shilian sighed. Never mind." Shilian's blood was an invaluable holy treasure with the power to sanctify, so how could a mortal's blood compare? But seeing how earnest this little soldier was, he didn't have the heart to tell him that what he'd done was pointless. "Thanks," he said instead, "but we still need some of my blood as a catalyst." Shilian took the sword with trembling hands. It took him a few tries to successfully pierce the middle of his forearm. Vivid red holy blood streamed down his pale white arm, and he used it to drip two curved lines in front of the cave, drawing two barriers. It could be said to be a waste of heaven's gift. Shilian also took care to mix in some of the boy's blood. As he completed the array, his dizziness grew stronger. "Let's go in." It was pitch black inside the cave. The boy took out a small flare torch from inside his robes and ignited it. The intense firelight brightened their surroundings. The young soldier's face was hidden behind his bandages that covered him completely, while Shilian's unkempt state was on display for all to see. His cold sweat was sticky, his hair was disheveled, his lips were red and swollen and smeared with blood from when he'd bitten his lip to sanctify his sword earlier. The firelight stabbed at Shilian's eyes, hurting them, and the wave of heat pouring off the torch tormented him. "Don't light the fire," Shilian demanded immediately. "Kill it." The boy immediately threw the flare torch on the ground and stepped on it to extinguish it, and they sank into darkness once more. Once they were inside the cave, Shilian sat down and arranged himself into a meditative position. Moments later, he spoke laboriously. "I have a mission for you. Are you up for it?" The boy dropped to the ground and kneeled. "I'm willing to risk my life to do my duty." Shilian painfully restrained his labored breathing and continued with forced calm. "I drew two sets of barriers in front of the cave. The outer barrier is to ensure nothing outside enters. The inner barrier is to prevent anyone inside from exiting." He silently panted for a few breaths before he continued. "There's enough space between the two barriers for one person. Stay there and watch over the cave entrance. No matter what you hear outside, do not leave. Likewise, do not come in no matter what sounds you hear from me." The boy was slightly perplexed. "Your Highness, you're staying here by yourself?" "Yes," Shilian said. "I don't know what I'll do. In any case, do not come in, no matter what happens." Under the circumstances, Shi Liang couldn't move very far. But as far as waiting for reinforcements, Qi Rong was probably still stumbling down the road, and just getting back to the imperial capital would take a long while. Who knew when help would come? The only thing he could do was temporarily seal off this small area, set up wards, and figure out a way to treat the tender fragrance. "Fruits born of flower yao are powerful temptresses," he rasped. "They're likely to ripen soon." Just then, the fragrance in the air suddenly surged, cutting off his words. That beguiling scent filled the air from earth to the sky, and the flower yao cackled ecstatically. My root is hard! The fruits have ripened!" they trumpeted. Smelling that excessively sweet fragrance, Shi Liang could feel his heart beating faster, and blood rushed to his brain. He gritted his teeth. "Hurry and go! Don't breathe in the scent, and if they come close, don't be scared. Nothing can cross the bloodline, but as long as your feet remain inside the barrier, you can strike them with your sword." The boy glanced outside and gave a hard nod. He rushed out with his sword in hand, stationing himself between the two bloodlines by the entrance. Outside the cave, in that field of corpses, the flowering plants were growing more and more vibrant in color. The briar field was quivering as if something beneath was about to burst from the ground. Until not long later, something did burst forth. The head of a woman. The woman's head that had sprouted beneath in the fresh air above the ground appeared drunk with joy, her eyes squeezing shut into crescent lines. Following immediately after was a round, smooth shoulder, then an entire arm. The fruits of the land of the tender were formed under the whiskers of their roots. They ripened into the shape of feminine forms, and the time was indeed ripe. Countless naked women were breaking out from beneath the earth. They plucked the bright red blossoms from atop their heads and bathed under the moonlight, stretching out their limbs to their heart's content. Those little flowers had emitted the fragrant scent at first, but now the ones secreting that sweet odor were the enchanting women. They patted off the mud that smeared their voluptuous bodies, fixed their hair, and walked toward the cave as they giggled alluringly. "Your Highness, we're coming!" That sweet fragrance was suffocating inside the cave. Shi Liang sat in the lotus position with his eyes closed, chanting the Tao Te Ching in his mind. However, it helped little. The flower yao called to him shamelessly, chirping all sorts of too familiar pet names. Baby, sweetheart, gaga, Didi. It was throwing his mind into turmoil, so Shi Liang tried reciting it out loud. "The 5 colors cause blindness, the 5 sounds cause deafness. Indulgent hunts cause madness, rare goods cause lawlessness. Calm over impatience, cold over heat, silence is the ultimate virtue. Be kind to those who are kind, be kind to those who are unkind." Shi Liang did not notice that his recitation was incoherent, and he stumbled over the scripture he could usually recite flawlessly, backward and forward. Outside the cave, the flower yao clapped and laughed tauntingly. "My dear crown prince, my sweetheart, my good highness, you're not a monk. Why are you reciting sutras? Ay-yo!" Shrieking erupted from all around. It sounded like, although the young soldier had been silent all that time, he'd grown furious at the flower yao and had begun chopping and slashing, madly chasing them away from the entrance as they wailed. "Murderer! You cursed little brat, destroyer of beauty!" some accused from a distance. "No tenderness in your heart at all. Scary, so brutal at such a young age. Imagine him fully grown." Like starving beasts, the flower yao relentlessly tried to squeeze themselves into the cave, but they couldn't manage it. They didn't notice the blood ray on the ground, and thought they were being blocked by the boy alone. After some discussion amongst themselves, they gathered not too far away and called to him, "Little Guga, why must you stop us from going in? It's not like we're going to do anything bad. We just want to have a good time with His Highness. Be good, little soldier, and don't hinder us from doing His Highness some good too. That little Didi is so mean. A shame he's so young and tender. He probably doesn't even know what doing good means." The flower yao fell all over themselves in another round of mocking giggles. Shi Liang cracked his eye open a slit, but he could see nothing aside from a black shadow standing at the entrance of the cave. It was the shadow of that boy, sword in hand, who was determined not to move, even in death. Suddenly one of the flower yao said, "Hey, little Guga, don't root yourself there like a stiff shaft. What do you want? Why not come with me over there to have some fun? What sort do you fancy? Am I your type?" The young soldier still didn't respond. Those flower yao thought in order to enter the cave they must go through him, so they all brought forth so they all brought forth all their tricks, coddling him with their words. What about me? How about this? Am I pretty? Look at me. Do you like this? Starting with flirtation, changing to complaints, and then devolving to curses. Regardless of their tactics, the boy still ignored them while they were far away, and struck at them if they drew near. Julien knew that before the land of the tenders emerged from the ground, they could change their shapes at will. He wanted to warn the boy, but due to his distressing predicament, he didn't dare open his mouth. Finally, when at last those heavy waves of heat passed, he managed to gasp, "Don't look at them!" It was exhausting enough simply fighting the hot blood that rushed to his head, so Julien's voice was terribly soft and hushed. But that young soldier heard him instantly and called out in response, "Yes, sir! Your Highness, how are you?" "I'm fine," Julien said. "If things become difficult to bear, shut your eyes, seal your nose and mouth." The young soldier hadn't had a chance to answer when another flower yow suddenly burst out laughing. "I know! Little guy, I bet your favorite type must look like this." It sounded as though a new land of the tender had emerged from the soil. A sudden, dead silence descended outside the cave. The young soldier seemed to have stopped breathing. In the next second, the crashing waves of laughter from the flower yow surged against Julien, drowning him. The flower yow clapped and screeched, "Ay-yo! What a play! What a play! My God, how did you come up with this? You slay me! Look, that brat is completely stunned. I bet you figured him out. This must be it. And here I thought that damn brat was a rock, but who knew how wrong we were? Such balls for somebody so young. You win. We're nothing. How about it, little guy? Come quick and enjoy this sweet, delicious sight. This is your chance. You won't find another shop that serves this dish if you leave this land of ours. If you don't seize this opportunity, you'll never get a taste, even if you dream of it for 800 years. Or do you want us to give you a hand? What a state you're in." The young soldier was thoroughly incensed, and his voice was icy as frost. "You are seeking death." Meanwhile, Julien was about to reach his limit inside the cave. His sight blurred, his ears pounded with rushing blood. He could no longer sit up straight. He collapsed forward and barely managed to keep himself off the ground with his hands. Taking that tumble loosened his gritted teeth, and in that moment of delirium, a pained, wretched moan escaped his lips. Julien swiftly covered his mouth the moment the sound leaked out, but the young soldier still whipped around. "Your Highness?" Supporting himself with one hand, Julien used the other to cover his mouth. His breathing was labored and erratic, and his shoulders convulsed and trembled. Seeing him, listening to him, one would probably assume he was weeping. Never in his life, before or after Ascension, had Julien experienced such a grueling ordeal. This was much more arduous than the toughest trial at the Royal Holy Temple. The strength of the arm that supported his weight failed, and his body keeled over to the side. As he lay on the ground, delirious and barely conscious, he saw the boy looking like he wanted to enter. "Don't come in!" Julien barked. "I said not to come in no matter what you hear!" The boy stopped in his tracks. Julien laboriously flipped over onto his back and somehow managed to regulate his breathing despite the waves of heat that pulsed and spread throughout every inch of his body. The flower yow outside the cave heard him tossing and turning at that intense fire consumed him, and they clapped as they cackled. "My good Highness, why be so hard on yourself? Today you're refusing yourself a good time because you're scared of losing devotees. Tomorrow you'll be scared to do other things because you're scared of losing devotees. Is that any way for a heavenly official to live? You're more like a prisoner with your hands bound by those who worship you. It's not worth it, being a god like that. You're gonna lose your place in heaven sooner or later, so why not just enjoy yourself now? Things come and go, no need to mind the petty details." Julien briefly lost control of his temper, and veins faintly bulged on his forehead. "Shut up!" he shouted, outraged. The flower yow naturally weren't afraid of him right now, and they started teasing the little soldier anew. "Little Dee, don't you agree? Aren't you feeling miserable just standing there?" His body was already miserably drenched in cold sweat. Exceedingly hot and bothered, Julien violently tore at his robes in search of even a faint breath of cool air. As he tore, he suddenly noticed, had strength returned to his arms? Although that energy didn't last long, leaving just as quickly as it came, he confirmed that the numbness had indeed passed. His vigor was gradually increasing, and yet Julien's heart sank. The tender fragrance inflicted numbness at first, followed by mania. The numbness had passed, which meant that the madness and passion would poison his veins at any moment. Although he'd drawn 2 barriers at the entrance of the cave, the interior one was made specifically to prevent his crazed self from charging out. But once mania seized him, he wasn't sure whether the barrier would really be enough to stop him. This moment of clarity was a rare blessing, and Julien clung to it with both hands, his mind rapidly poring over ways to handle the situation.